Okay, it's time for Terrarium update number 3. So far I've been voicing over the audio, but some of this update is from the camera just taken out while I was filming, so the sound quality is going to change a little bit, FYI. So, in the backyard, it looks like the creeping fig is doing great. In fact, if you look close, you can see a lot of root growth, which I think is the creeping fig, and there's some algae or moss or something growing in there, especially in the soil right up against the glass. The lichen, as ever, is an enigma. It's still green, and there's some stuff sprouting up out of the dirt, so it'll be interesting to see what that is and if it can survive long term, or if it's just going to sprout up and then die again. This other one with the native plants is almost completely dead. There's plenty of water in there, and plenty of mold, but not really any signs of animal life, and almost all of the plants are dead. There is a little bit of grass and a couple of sprouts of something, but no sign of root growth, and there's a little bit of algae. It looks like the creeping fig is really the big winner out here. And there's a big difference. You can notice a lot of mold growth in the old whiskey bottle, but not a lot in this marinara jar. I don't know if that means that there's something eating the mold, or if it's somehow less prone to growing there. Maybe it's just because the plants aren't dead yet. Or maybe there's too much water in the whiskey jar. It didn't air out as much, I suspect, because the neck's smaller, so it could just be that it's got more moisture and therefore there's more mold growth. Yeah, this stuff, lichen, it's wet now because I just watered it, but it was completely dry this morning. So there's something growing up in here. The lichen itself is still not really indicating whether it's living or not. I didn't give it any room to expand, so it can't show me life by growing outward. So there's really no way to tell until we get some extra space for it to kind of prove its life in. But it at least hasn't all, turned gray and crumbled into dust. So that's a good sign, I guess. Alright, so the indoor plants, well, the lichen in native plant terrarium is sort of clinging to life. The grass is almost all dead and the chickweed is slowly dying. There is less mold than before, so something is eating it, or maybe it's just also decaying now that it's consumed most of the dead plants it was living on. The lichen still looks pretty much inanimate. The all moss container is totally the same as it's always been. Maybe it's alive, maybe it's dead, who knows. Maybe it's dormant. I guess looks the same as it did when I planted it is the outcome that I'm looking for, so maybe I shouldn't have any complaints about that. The chickweed and moss container, the Hoggelschwag bottle, seems to have a little bit of life. The reindeer moss still looks the same as all the other terrariums. The other moss looks like it's dying, which suggests that it was alive to begin with. There's like one chickweed plant that's still sort of alive, but relatively little mold in there. There's no real sign of root growth, which isn't great, but it isn't terrible either. Most of what's in here is moss, and that isn't going to grow roots anyhow. And the pickle jar is doing pretty well. There's loads of roots in it, and the grass looks basically dead, but there's tons of roots growing around a lot of little seedlings that are sprouting up, and there is some grass that looks like it's still living. The seedlings don't necessarily mean anything about the long-term viability of this jar though, just that it started with some seeds. If they sprout and then just die out without reproducing, then they're really just prolonging the inevitable. But it does mean that the dirt and water are good, for germination anyway. Most of the grass in the center is dead too. I think there's not enough light. It could be too much moisture, but I think it just doesn't get enough light indoors here, and with the lid covering most of the container, the light situation gets even worse. But on the whole, the indoor terraria aren't looking very good. There's a lot of death. It's basically just the lichen that seems to be doing well, and we don't even know if it's really alive. Alright, so the outside plants. Well, again, creeping fig plant that's doing best. You can see plenty of root growth near the bottom. The little moss bit I put in there has kind of propagated its way through all the soil along the glass. This is the only one where the reindeer moss has changed color. It's become totally
like a light mint green sort of thing. And actually, there is a little bit of like mold or fungus or something growing on the creeping fig where it touches the glass. But most of it seems to be doing alright. This other one, it's a bit of a different story. There's an awful lot of death in there. Most of what's alive is sort of a brownish green. The leaves are touching the glass, and again, they seem to be infected with something, probably from getting too much moisture. The grass is there, but it's brown. There is some root growth. If you look over here in the corner, there's this little white shoot. And there's a couple of, like, this thing is some kind of sprouted new plant, but if you look in the middle, again, there's an awful lot of dead stuff hanging out. This is still a whole lot of death. But not too much mold. And there's still plenty of water in there. They don't seem to be leaking, evaporating, whatever you'd call it. The water's not escaping the containers. So that's good.
So yeah, that's about where the terraria are at 3 or so weeks in. This was filmed on February 1st, 2020, and the jars were sealed up on January 9th, 2020, so it's been 23 days.